So welcome everyone to the second talk on experiencing no self. So that guided meditation that we just did, I guess you could call it sounds and thoughts meditation. I imagine many of you have experienced that before. It's one of my favorite meditations in the sense that it's, one of those, I think our meditations, when we say favorite, can mean a whole bunch of different things, but it's one that where, some insights for me arose around the nature of thoughts, many years ago. So I think I like to offer that one, and I actually come back to it often myself. So if you're kind of following along with the exercises I'm giving for as I do these talks, the meditation I would recommend is the sounds and thoughts meditations for the week. At least a couple of times, and seeing how it resonates with your current practice. And of course, there's a sounds and thoughts meditation on the payattention.ca website. And there's also one now on Insight Timer. I believe I have a sounds and thoughts. So if you just look for my name on Insight Timer, you can use that as well. So that would be my meditation, formal meditation practice for the week. So today we're really looking at, kind of taking the theme of, you're not your thoughts, which we've talked about in this group several times. And it's really kind of creating a distance between self and ego, just seeing that you can actually just witness, the self as witness can see just thoughts arising and passing away, just as you can witness sounds arising and passing away as just events occurring, right? They're not, it's not you making them happen. And I don't, the first time I saw that, it was, many years ago, as I said, but just to see that, wow, this thoughts just happen, right? They just occur. I have no control over this. I can, in fact, if I sit down and say, I want all my thoughts to stop, all that happens is I get a really, really busy mind, right? What you resist just gets, exacerbates and not only persists, but exacerbates. And that's an amazing discovery for a human being to see, because we identify so much with our thoughts. So just to see that they arise without our consent, without our doing, is a really important first step in understanding no self. Really important. And one you'll probably circle back to again and again. But it's one that it's really I think the crucial entry point. The Buddha talked about mental formations not being a self. And this is really, the thoughts are so central in mental formations. So I'm going to go into this a little bit more. So folks remember last week, the definitions of ego and self. Got a bit conceptual and maybe confusing for some, and just kind of, ride along with me on this. And it's a model, perhaps a model that you're not familiar with, or even a model that contradicts what other teachers have said or what practices you've had. And I mean, I would be surprised if it doesn't contradict something you've read or heard, right? Because there's so many different models out there. And I don't really want to get bogged down in models. I don't want to say, here's the Dogen model, or here's the Zen Mahayana model, or here's the, even within Theravada Buddhism, you can say that this Thai forest tradition has a different model than the Sayadaws in Burma or Sri Lanka, or the Bhantes in Sri Lanka. They actually have different models on how to different. They use the terms in different ways. But so the point isn't so much which model that we use. It's any model can be used as skillful means to seeing no self. And this particular model that I'm offering is one that resonates with my personal experience. And I guess you could say it's a model that is also more closely consistent with the Thai forest tradition. So you'll hear Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Sumedho and Varadamo use the similar terms and talk in similar ways. So that's which is quite different than what you'd hear from a Burmese Sayadaw. Very different. So just to point that out, and to remember, just to kind of think the ego is the me and the self is the I. So I am, I am a angry person. I am a compassionate person. The I is the self witnessing the experience of being, a certain, personality. So the self is the witnesser, the observer of experience. And the ego is the activity of being focused on our inner concerns, like everything's about me. And so this distinction is important as we work through these teachings, and we see that we start to see that thoughts, for example, don't comprise an essence or an independent nature. Right? But we can still believe that there's a self that is witnessing this, right? So that's why I'm drawing this distinction. And again, we'll come back to this again and again, because the witness is the last self-view or self-concept that falls away. Self-view. So this idea of the witness. So we'll do a lot of practices where we're witnessing. I'm asking you to observe and witness and so forth. Notice. So we'll use this aspect of self-view to actually see that we're not the egoic self. We're not the ego, which is what first we transcend ego, or the ego falls away, really first. Guy Armstrong has a book called Emptiness, Practical Guide for Meditators. And in that he quotes, by repeating I and me and describing ourselves as being a certain way, we've come to believe that something real is being pointed to that isn't actually there. So no self literally means there's no self. Like there's no, we no longer believe that we're our thoughts or our body, or even that I am awareness. So if it's unclear now, that's okay. We'll continue to peel away the layers of self-concept over the months, and hopefully this becomes more clear of what I'm getting at. Just another clarification. I got obviously I got a few questions about what self and ego were, because it got there's concepts, and it can confuse the mind. So just a guy also got a question about what's the difference between not self and no self, right? Because you hear a lot of teachers say not self, and I'm saying no self. Either term is fine. The Pali term anatta can be translated either way, right? So they're both real. I view them as the same. Atta means self, and an is the negation. So it literally means no. It's a negation of self. It means no self. If you translated it directly. And I like to use no self because it kind of points directly to knowing that the world is empty of self, that no self can be found anywhere. Right? There's just no, it's not found. And really, whatever definition we use, ultimately, the most important thing is to remember that we're not talking about a philosophical position, that there's no self, but it's a step-by-step investigation of our direct experience. So that's really what's most important. And some teachers will say they don't use no self because it's more likely to become a philosophical definitive statement. But either way, as long as you come with the mindset that this is an investigation of direct experience and not a philosophical statement, then either term is fine. And I'll just continue to use no self. So seeing that we're not our thoughts is the first step to knowing no self. That's been my experience, and really the experience I've seen others transition through. I mean, this is introduced in mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is an introductory course to the sort of popular mindfulness. Even though the notion of no self is not mentioned, there's significant teachings are on letting go of thoughts, that you are not your thoughts. In fact, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which deals more with depression, has a whole week on your thoughts are not facts and you are not your thoughts. Because of course, that's one of the key drivers of depression, is really believing and buying into our negative thinking. So this is a key teaching. So I kind of see it as kind of the first step. So if you've done a lot of this work, again, bear with me. If you haven't, then it's as I said, the first glimpse into this notion of not self, to seeing that thoughts is to rise, pass away like bubbles of energy, all on their own, without any, you have no control over the process. They arise without your consent. So in that sense, the Buddha said they were empty of an essence or an essential nature. The Buddha used for mental formations the metaphor of a plantain tree or a banana tree. So the trunk of a plantain, if you cut it open, it's empty and hollow. There's no evidence of any wood in the middle, of any core wood in the middle. So when we investigate mental formations and thoughts, when they're investigated by a meditator or a practitioner, we also see that they're empty or hollow with no substantive entity or nature. So I find those metaphors that the Buddha used to be helpful, and just kind of look at thoughts with that kind of empty, hollow nature. So when we believe that we are our thoughts, in fact, when the process of equating our self with any aspect of our experience is called identification. You've probably heard that. So when we identify with the body, we identify with thoughts and other mental formations, and we can identify as consciousness or the witness as being, our true nature. So that's called identification. And so in our meditation practice that we just did, and during our daily lives, we're mostly unaware of our thoughts. we can sit and meditate and the mind can race around. We go through our day and the mind races around. I mean, um, I think if most of you have probably noticed this, how much of the time your mind is just racing with thoughts about this and that. And we can, if we're not intentionally conscious, I just accepted somebody else into the group here. I think I heard their mic was on. Yeah, if we're not conscious, then we're just constantly lost in thought, right? We're just on kind of an autopilot mode, and thoughts are just kind of pushing us around. And you can find your mood shifts from being, happiness to sadness to this to that quite quickly because thoughts are just pulling you in all different directions. So you're really almost controlled by these random thoughts that are just arising moment to moment. So thoughts just jump in and off we go with them, right? This is when we're kind of unconscious of the thoughts arising. Then maybe at some point, we realize we're lost in thought in our lives. Perhaps all of a sudden you go, well, I'm just I'm lost in thought. So and that's a moment of waking up from this state of being lost in thought. This process of self-thinking. So to experience no self, we practice being aware of thoughts as they arise, rather than when they are over. This sounds like a very simple thing. So we see thoughts when they arise, or immediately after they arise, you could say, rather than after they've kind of finished their train, finished their, the whole process. You notice them just as they arise or immediately after they arise. So we're experiencing them when they arise rather than after they're over. We start to see and experience thoughts as just objects arising and passing, just as sounds do. Right? We start to see the selfless and impersonal nature of thoughts. There's an exercise that Joseph Goldstein often suggests for people in working with thoughts. He said, imagine that every thought that's arising in your mind is coming from the person next to you. So you're just imagining this. Every thought that's arising. It's kind of a fun thing to do when you're with another person or in a room with other people. Just imagining that every thought that arises in your mind, you're just imagining it, that it's coming from the person sitting next to you. And just notice if it would make a difference in how you're relating to thoughts, if you thought of them that way. Would it make a difference? It might give you a sense that identification with thoughts is something extra that we add on, right? That it's extra. The thought itself is appearing and disappearing, just like a sound. But being identified with it is something that we're adding, something extra that we're adding. And this is where we create the sense of the egoic sense of self. And the ego is perpetuated and fabricated. So it's an interesting exercise that Joseph Goldstein suggests we play around with as during the day. Another thing you can do is when the mind is when a mind is thinking, just asking the question, what is a thought? What is it? We're not looking at the content so much. It's just noticing, well, what is this thing that we call a thought? And just seeing it, seeing the phenomenon of thought as opposed to the content. You can pause and see a thought arising. You can see how insubstantial it is. It's very ephemeral. Eh? It's like I describe them as an energy bubble. That ephemeral. So we wonder, why do the ephemeral, insubstantial, impersonal phenomenon we call thoughts have so much power over us? Interesting. And really, when you look, how much power they have over us. They're like little, forget which one teacher called them little dictators. Go there, do this, don't do that, do this. And if we're unconscious, we believe that they're us, that this is who we are, then we just kind of follow them along, and often can get into some trouble. I'll talk more a little bit about how we can relate to thoughts sort of in our daily lives. Another metaphor is looking at thoughts as clouds floating through the sky. That's another useful metaphor. I gave you the metaphor of, the screen, looking at thoughts as just images and ideas flowing across a movie screen, and others as clouds, bubbles in a pond forming, dissolving. So those are all metaphors that we can use to, when we're meditating or during our daily lives, to just see the true nature of thoughts. So what we're being taught here, what I'm teaching here, is to disengage with the ego and to engage the self as witness, right? So we're noticing, we're observing thoughts arising and passing away. This is what mindfulness is all about. We're engaging mindfulness so that we're conscious of our present moment experience. We're present of thoughts arising and passing away. And a big part of that is to see its insubstantial and impersonal nature. Right? This is what the practice in many ways is all about. So we're disengaging from the ego, because these self-referencing thoughts is the basis in many ways of the ego. And when identity leaves the ego, of which thoughts is a primary part, so when identity leaves seeing thoughts as who we are, it leaves the ego and it goes back to the witness, this is very freeing. Right? This can be very freeing. It's like waking up from a dream in many ways. It has a real feeling of I've been living in a dream, taking for real what is actually as real as the dreams I have at night. It's like waking, it's a dream of the ego. When you wake up from the dream of the ego, you really experience what self is as witnessing. So it's very freeing. Another aspect of this that I said I would talk about is how it affects our daily life is when we see thoughts for what they are, we're less likely to be pulled into the drama of them. This can be very helpful. Be pulled into the drama of them, be pulled into um, mood swings, into depression. Thoughts can very easily take us. So in many ways, I like to say too that they lose their juice. They lose their power over us. So they can arise, but they lose their juice, their power over us. That's why I think, sometimes we on retreats, we do this noting practice where we label our top 5 tunes, the 5 most common thought patterns that arise. And often they're painful stories, that have been causing us difficulties in our lives, and they just keep coming up and coming up. And over a 7-day silent retreat, after you've seen the same friggin' thought pattern that's causing you distress, you've seen it 50, 100 times, it loses its juice, right? It loses its power. In fact, I can remember laughing, thinking how ridiculous it is that this thought can come up and move, and the drama of it can shake me so much that I get this bodily, emotional reaction. It's unbelievable that this happens, that this can happen. And when thoughts, or when the impersonal nature of thoughts arise, and we see them for what they are, they lose their juice, we're not drawn into the drama, all kinds of choices arise that weren't there previously. Right? I can follow this thought. I don't have to follow this thought. Right? So not all thoughts are believed. Choices arise in that space when we see the impersonal nature of thoughts. So this can be very freeing and very, it can be one of the most heartwarming and beneficial, I guess is another word we could use, aspects of this practice that can shift how we live our lives. So when we see the true nature of thought, this is really can almost feel like a superpower for us. It feels like we've got this new ability to navigate the world. Choices arise. Some thoughts are helpful, some thoughts serve me and others, or serve others, and other thoughts don't. So we can act on the thoughts that are helpful, that serve ourselves and that serve others. Another book that I've found really useful. So I mentioned Guy Armstrong's book, and I know some of you are reading that or have read that book. Another book is Robert Spira, S-P-I-R-A, a book entitled "Being Aware of Being Aware." And in that title, you kind of see where perhaps I'm going with this no self. It's beyond awareness or beyond witness. It's the awareness, the source from which awareness itself comes. And we'll get into that, those teachings. But he uses the movie metaphor quite eloquently. In that whole book, he comes back to the movie metaphor. So we're seeing phenomenon appearing on the screen, and thoughts being one of the phenomenon. And we're neither the witness watching the movie, nor are we the screen. Our true nature is the screen. Their true nature is the screen, but we're neither the phenomenon and objects on the screen, nor are we the person, the witness watching the screen, but we're the screen itself. The screen is untouched by what appears on it. The screen always remains the same regardless of what objects pass through it. So I find that a helpful metaphor as well for this way of looking at self, being aware of being aware. So just one last practice, again, because we're talking more here about experiencing no self. And books are helpful. So I'm giving you kind of book references as well, because books can be helpful in filling out the terrain a little bit. It's not so much to become a scholar of no self, although there are some wonderful scholars that are helpful to talk to. Bhikkhu Bodhi is could say a scholar of no self. I met a Rinpoche in forget where I think I might have been in Bhutan, and he was a scholar of no self. And that's about all he could talk about. You could ask him questions about pretty well anything to try to start a conversation, and he would just give you one-word answers. And then if you started talking about the Dharma, in particular no self, he'd engage you for hours on end. It's like, but he was also a real scholar of no self, but also lived it. Spent 6 years on retreat, contemplating and meditating around no self, or emptiness, as he would call it. So another practice is noticing thoughts. So noticing that thoughts just arise off on their own, uninvited, without your consent, and often when you might prefer some peace and quiet. You might actually say, I'd like to feel some calm and some peace right now. And what you get is a barrage of thinking. I mean, there's one indicator, if you had control over your thoughts, you should be able to just turn them off, right? In fact, for many of us, that would be like a dream come true, just to be able to just for half an hour, just turn it off and feel some tranquility and peace. So we're noticing that they just come on their own, and this it's nothing we're doing. It's very freeing just to see that for what it is, and to notice that we fight with them, or struggle with them, or judge them. That it just makes it worse. Some people find when we do the thoughts meditation, for example. So I've heard people say, I have a really busy mind. I sit down to meditate and it's just one thought after another. You tell me to, when I notice I'm lost in thought, come back to, whatever the object is, and poof, off my mind goes again. I come back to poof, off it goes again. I come back to the object. And this just happens over and over again. What am I doing wrong? So it's not doing anything wrong. This is just the nature of your mind at that moment. You're just noticing that that's what's happening. And then I'll ask them, how do you feel about this? What's happening? And 8 times out of 10, you'll get a sense that I don't like it. I want it to stop. Right? There's an element of resistance that's perhaps unspoken, but you can kind of pull it out. It's there, it's underneath. They're judging that this is happening. And of course, when you do that, it just increases the frequency of the thoughts, because what you resist will persist and actually exacerbate, will get worse. So when we do these kind of thoughts meditations, like the one we just did, where I say just just sit there and wait for thoughts to arise and notice them arise and pass away. Sometimes people report that I didn't hardly had any thoughts. Isn't that interesting? You're just totally open to thoughts arising. There's no resistance. And the frequency of thoughts decreases. So that is also very interesting to know that this is how we can be with thoughts, to let go of that resistance, the judging, let go of the judging of the busy mind. Very, very important in this first step or phase of seeing no self, is letting thoughts be. And this takes practice, right? It takes some practice to be with thoughts in this way. And meditation helps, because it's a controlled laboratory for us to practice in. There's less happening. When you're in your daily life, of course, there's so much happening that, thoughts can be cranked up quite high. Another thing we can do, and another teacher that I have deep respect for, is Byron Katie. Not one you often hear in insight meditation circles as a teacher that they might follow, but I just love Byron Katie's teachings. And she talks about, asking yourself, is this thought true? And the second question is, what evidence is there that this thought is absolutely true? Because on the surface, it might seem true, but what evidence is there that this thought is absolutely true? It can really be very helpful in seeing that thoughts are not facts. And you got lots of time to practice, because lots of opportunity, because there's a research that I don't know how they estimated this, but the average person thinks between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. That's a big range, 12,000 to 60,000, but gives you some indication of what we're practicing with. So that's a lot of moments of mindfulness and moments to practice, 60,000. So in here, we're observing the process of thinking, not the content. The only time you would notice the content is just to put a little label on it. There's the boss story, there's the mother story, there's the worry story, or whatever it might be. You might just put that little label on it, but we're not following the content. You might put that little label on it, and we just let it go. So the content is the actual story. He said this, she said that. Well, I did this, they did that. And it's all the story that arises, and people love their stories, right? But we're not. This is not what we're practicing with. It's this process of thinking. Adyashanti invites us to another teacher I admire, is look at thoughts and notice that every thought that arises is just a thought, especially all the thoughts that refer to a self, which is, that was our practice last week, noticing how many of our thoughts are actually self-referential thoughts. Noticing they're just a thought. Notice that all thoughts that refer to a personal self simply refer to more thoughts. It's just thoughts referring to other thoughts that create the sense of self. So there's no referring to anything substantive with any substantial entity. It's just thoughts referring to more thought. So look at this in your direct experience. And it's maybe not to be as simple as it sounds, because we're so accustomed to thinking about our experience rather than just experiencing our experience. So here I'm just asking you to experience your experience. So take any me thought that arises What does that thought refer to? It's just referring to more thoughts. For example, it could be referring to your body. The body's just an organic organism. Where is there a me in the body? Could be referring to your personality. But this is just another way of that you're expressing yourself in this human incarnation. May refer to a perception, simply another thought based on memory and conditioning. And refer to an emotion, again, just based on more thoughts. So we're kind of looking scientifically here at thought. You'll find that all the thoughts referring to a me are just referring to more thoughts. Yeah. So we can really see that we don't find a self. And we don't find a self in thoughts. We recognize the impersonal nature of thoughts. We can really experience a moment of stillness, really a gap. Don't know if you've noticed that when the mind stops self-referential thinking, stops creating the me, the ego. There's this gap. There's this stillness. You might experience it right now. Just a gap. And the mind doesn't know what to do with this. The mind doesn't know what to do with this. The mind's at a loss when it experiences this stillness, and it jumps in, right? It'll jump in with something. So we're noticing that as well. And we'll talk more about, the mind and relating to how it relates to no self. So yeah, I'd like to open it up for any any questions that folks might have based